Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and this week's contract tip has to do with time limits and counter offers. So on a purchase and sale agreement, when a buyer makes an initial offer to a seller and or both, on a counter offer form, if a seller is making a counter offer to a buyer, or vice versa, if parties are going more than one round in the negotiations on counter offer forms, there is a place for the party making the offer to put a time limit on those terms. And it says in the GAR purchase and sale agreement, it is on the bottom of page 1, it's paragraph A11, and it talks about time limit of the offer. The offer set forth herein expires at blank o'clock on whatever date. Mistakenly, a lot of agents or a lot of buyers and sellers misinterpret that and think that that means that is the time frame within which the other party is to respond. It has nothing to do with response time. There is nothing in a contract mandating a party respond to an offer or a counteroffer. It just says the offer set forth, that's important, herein expires at a certain time on a certain date. So that term, the time limit, as defined in GAR, it means that those terms, without any modification, are open for acceptance until that time frame. And it is specifically defined in paragraph B11 of the GAR form, Purchase and Sale Agreement F20, and it states specifically, the time limit of the offer shall be the date and time referenced herein when the offer expires, unless prior to that date and time, both of the following have occurred. A, the offer has been accepted by the party to whom the offer was made, and B, notice of acceptance of the offer has been delivered to the party that made the offer. So the offer has been accepted by the party that the offer was presented to, and notice of that acceptance was delivered back to the party making the offer. What does that sound like? Yes, that sounds like a binding agreement, and please see the video I did on all about binding agreement dates for a thorough explanation on binding agreement dates. So what does that mean? That means that the terms as written in the initial offer are open for acceptance until that time frame without modification. If there is modification, meaning if there's a counter offer, then the time limit is a moot point anyway. It doesn't matter because the party to whom the offer was made is not accepting those terms. So the question is, before I get to the question, the verbiage is the same on the counteroffer form. So on the GAR counteroffer form, which is form F22, counteroffer or modification of unaccepted original offer, it has a time limit at the bottom of that page too, and it says this counteroffer, which incorporates and controls over the original offer, shall expire at blank o'clock AM or PM on the date of, unless prior to that time it is accepted in writing and notice as that terms defined in the original offer is delivered to the party who made the counteroffer. Just so you know, on the RE forms, conceptually it is the same thing. On the RE forms, in the RE Form 100, Contract for Purchase and Sale of Residential Real Estate, it says the offer is open for acceptance until blank o'clock on AM or PM on a date. An acceptance after that time is considered a counteroffer. So, but let's talk about this a little more. And that verbiage is the same on the RE forms counteroffer form. So, a couple things. Number one is that means those terms without modification or change are open for acceptance until that time frame. If there's any change, if there's any counteroffer, any modification, any change, then the time limit doesn't matter because there is a change to the terms. Once a counteroffer is made, it is a new offer back from one party to the other party. Typically, the counteroffers go back and forth. So, initially the initial offer is from the buyer to the seller, and then there is usually a counter offer from the seller back to the buyer, and then perhaps a counter offer back from the buyer to the seller, so forth and so on. So again, once there is a counter offer, once there is any change to anything or any modification of the offer as made by the party, then that constitutes a new offer, and it has to be accepted by the party and then bound by the party making the last offer with written notice of acceptance. So the question comes in. So I hope it's readily understood when the parties are using an initial purchase and sale agreement to make an offer and then a counter offer form to make a counter offer. It does get a little confusing, however, when a party makes a counter offer on the original offer by scratching through a term. I refer to this when I teach classes as the scratch and sniff method. When a party scratches through a term on the original offer, makes a change, and initial dates and times that change. So if, let's say the buyer makes an offer to the seller on a purchase and sale agreement, let's say the seller makes a modification on that form by marking through a specific provision, changing that provision, initialing that provision, and then sending it back to the other party, in this example, the buyer. Does the time limit on the original offer, is that still intact or no? Well, no, it is not intact, because even if the time limit is not countered, the original time limit is not in force because that original offer was modified. So in essence, what you have, if the time limit was not countered in that method, then you have a counter offer with no time limit. But I'll get to that in a second. But my first point, I've got a couple points. Number one, time limit of an offer has nothing to do with response time. It has everything to do with those terms being open for acceptance until that time frame. Second thing, if a party receiving the offer makes any modification of the original offer, a counter offer, or any change whatsoever, the time limit is of no effect because those terms were not accepted. It constitutes a new offer back to the other party that the other party now has to accept or counter or reject. Regardless if the counter offer or modification is made on a counter offer form, which I highly suggest all the parties use, or if the counter offer is made on the original offer by marking through a provision and changing the provision and then initialing that provision. Regardless of the form of the counteroffer, any modification or change negates the time limit from the original offer. So what happens if the original offer either does not include a time limit or a counteroffer does not include a time limit, whether that counteroffer be on the specific counteroffer form or that counteroffer be a scratch and sniff or scratch through and change an initial modification to the original offer back to the party? What happens if there's no time limit on there? Well, if there's no time limit, then those terms are open for acceptance. And the party that made that last offer or counteroffer, if there's no time limit on there, that party needs to be aware that there is an open offer out to the buyer or the seller. And if they want to take that off the table, then you would need to execute a withdraw of offer or counteroffer. And there are forms for that in both GAR and the RE forms. So why would you use a counteroffer? When would you not use a counteroffer? You'd use a counteroffer. When would you not put a time limit on there? Well, if you are working in a multiple offer situation, perhaps you may not want to put a time limit on there, or you might want to put a long time frame on there. It depends on the situation. This could work both ways. A buyer or a seller might want to put a long time frame on there so that if the seller or the buyer, if the party accepts those terms in a number of days, you would still have a binding contract rather than it being a counteroffer if it was made after the time limit. Or a lot of times if you are dealing with an institutional seller, for example, a foreclosure property then you might want to put a long time limit on there or no time limit on there due to the knowledge and experience that you would have knowing that that entity typically will only respond to you Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So if you're making that offer on a weekend, for example, if you're making that offer to an institutional seller, a foreclosure bank that owns the property, for example, or a hedge fund or corporate entity, so to speak, and you're making that offer on a Friday afternoon, typically you're not going to want to put a time limit on there of Saturday or even Sunday, because usually in those situations, those corporate entities are not doing business again until Monday. So just some things to keep in mind. I think that's it. So again, on the, if a party makes a counter offer on the original offer by marking through and changing the terms and initialing them, if they don't also in their counter offer back, if they don't also make a new time limit for that offer, again, that would constitute an open time limit on that counter offer. So if agents and buyers and sellers, if you're watching, if you have an open offer or counter offer out to the other party, you need to be cognizant of that and make sure to withdraw it if your party wants to pull those terms off of the table. So thank you so much for watching. Hope this contract tip helped you out. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education. Can't see her.